Imagine climate change impacts pummels Indonesia. Tsunamis, drought, floods, landslides, sea level rise. Hundreds, then thousands of Indonesians start leaving. Then millions. Right now, 20 million on makeshift boats are right outside Singapore, seeking shelter, food, and water. Millions more are heading towards Australia. The same scene is unfolding in the Mediterranean Sea at the gates of Europe and on the US-Mexico border, where tens of millions of Latin Americans, Africans, South Asians, Arabs, climate refugees, all of them are seeking refuge on makeshift boats and on foot. What exactly are Singapore, Australia, Europe, and the United States going to do? Are they going to shoot them? Are they going to let them in? Or are they going to complete Trump's wall, except this time take it all around their countries? But what happened, you might ask? What happened was we delivered progress without sustainability. That's what happened. The progress that we delivered, in large part powered by burning gas and coal and oil, was amazing for 200 years. We doubled global life expectancy. We cut infant mortality from 50% to 2.9% globally. We pretty much conquered illiteracy. And every one of you, right this second, has in their pocket more information than Abraham Lincoln or Louis XIV ever had access to in their entire lives. But we delivered that progress, in large part burning coal, oil, and gas, while cooking the books. How bad is it? Every single earnings number of every single company in the world is actually wrong. Now, at the beginning, obviously, we did not know that we were cooking the books. So when the first coal plant opened in London in 1882, it was a beautiful sight. It lit up a part of the town. It powered the telegram. And we then built a global infrastructure burning oil, gas, and coal. But at least 40 years ago, we should have known and must have known that we were cooking the books. As a matter of fact, according to a United Nations body called the IPCC, we have known that humans have an impact on climate through burning oil, gas, and coal for about 100 years. But let's be generous and call it 40. Because 40 years ago, Exxon scientists had scientific papers that predicted pretty much exactly where global warming was going to be today, and that's all public information. But what did we do about it? We pretty much did nothing about it. And the data is very clear. Emissions are still rising. Now, we came up with very creative ways to do nothing about it. First, we said, collectively, governments, companies, lobbyists, think tanks, that in fact, humans don't cause an impact on the climate through burning fossil fuels. So we just denied it. Then we buried the evidence. After that, companies became more creative and said things like, oh my God, how can you possibly have me estimate my impact on the environment if you, government, don't give me a carbon price, or you, government, don't force me to clean up my water discharge full of chemicals, or you, governments, don't force me to take responsibility for the plastic that I'm dumping everywhere to an extent that every single one of us today is eating, drinking, and breathing plastic. But recently, we came up with an even more fantastic way to cook the books. And it's called ESG. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance risks, that a business runs into, and it's about cataloging these risks so that investors take them into account when looking at the performance of a company. Now, ESG is a beautiful thing because, hypothetically, if you're looking at a portfolio of buildings, for example, which you want to buy, today financial statements only show you how much money these buildings make and how much it costs to run them. They do not show you, for example, the emissions that went into building that building, the emissions that the building is emitting today, the deforestation impact, if any, of that building, and the sea level rise protection investment that needs to be made to defend that building. So ESG is, at the moment, basically a lot of blah, blah, blah to say, I'm going to take this big bucket, I'm going to put in it everything I don't want on my balance sheet and in my earnings, and then I'm going to just forget about it in computing my profits. It's actually very elegant as a way of continuing to do nothing. And ESG took off because of its feel-good factor. So 10 years ago, ESG was pretty much zero in terms of global assets under management. Today, it's already $1 out of $3 that are professionally managed. In other words, $1 out of $3 professionally managed pretends that it's being managed taking into account ESG factors. And soon, it's going to be 100% of assets under management because it's just very elegant and because we, citizens, want clean investment products. But there's at least 4 problems with ESG, and that's at least 4 problems. The first one is there are no standards for disclosing environmental, social, or governance risks. And so what companies do is they arbitrage between them. They find kind of the best standard to get the best governance grade, and then they go to that one. And it's, frankly, the standardization is a complete zoo, but hopefully something is going to be done about it. The second problem is that abuse is rife. We all know that deforestation is a major driver of climate change. 78% of mutual funds offer ESG investment products. How many would you think actually filter their investments for deforestation risk? The answer is 0. 0 also price climate risk and take it into account when investing. The third problem is epic greenwashing. And I mean epic greenwashing. It's almost too beautiful to describe, but I'll give you one one of my favorite examples. In 2020, 253 funds in the United States switched to an ESG focus. 253 funds. Out of these, 87% modified their name by adding things like climate or sustainable or green or ESG. Guess how many changed their underlying portfolio initially? 0. And the fourth problem, regrettably, is actually bigger and more lethal. G, governance, is about how well a company is managed. Social, or S, is about human capital and how you deal with your stakeholders. I can accept that these two can go in a bucket which hopefully investors would read. But E is about environmental destruction. It's a completely different thing, and it has to be priced, then flow through earnings, and impact executive pay, which at the moment it does not do. And we're not talking small numbers. Companies worldwide in 2019 were responsible for $7.6 trillion of environmental destruction that they did not pay for. That's 1.5 times the GDP of France and the UK combined, $7.6 trillion. And if you look at climate change as a subset of that 7.6, and take a few companies as an example, just to get our head around the issue, let's start with Exxon, the oil company. Exxon, by its own account, discloses that it's responsible for 730 million tons of CO2 of emissions per year. Now, the social cost of carbon, in other words, the destruction of each ton of carbon from a climate change and environmental perspective, is anywhere between $50 per ton of CO2 to $200 per ton of CO2, depending on which study you look at. If you look at the Biden administration, at the moment, their tentative number, which undoubtedly is going to go up, is $51. So let's be generous to Exxon and take $50. If you take $50 and you multiply that by the 730 million tons, you get $36.5 billion. That's $36.5 billion of climate impacts, which Exxon is responsible for, but are nowhere to be found on its financial statements or in its earnings, and are nowhere taken into account in its executive pay. And it's not just Exxon, by the way. It's every single company in the world, with no exceptions. None. And what that means is that for 40 years, because we have buried that environmental destruction outside the financial statements, what we've done is we've literally moved tens of trillions of dollars to the wrong place. We sent them to search for more oil, more gas, more coal, more plastic, more polluting products, instead of having done the right thing, sending them to the right place, which would have meant that today we would have been done with that climate change challenge already. So Exxon in a good year makes $20 billion. Its earnings are therefore misstated by something like 200%. BASF, the German chemical group, their earnings, if you do the very same math based on their numbers, are misstated by 67%. 67%. Toyota makes also about $20 billion a year, but if you take its emissions, multiply that by $50, you get $20 billion, which means that Toyota actually has never been profitable. And all that money has been diverted to petrol cars when it shouldn't have. This is hugely meaningful because if we weren't cooking the books, your electric boiler right now would instantaneously be cheaper than your gas boiler. Green hydrogen would already be with us. We would be flying electric planes. We would be sailing electric boats. Bill Gates talks about a green premium, which according to him is the premium you have to pay for a zero carbon product compared to a fossil product of the same type. So a plastic straw versus a biodegradable straw. But in fact, the green premium would instantly disappear and would never have existed if we weren't cooking the books. And looked at a different way, there is no green premium unless you are cooking the books. This cooking the books thing is a pandemic. Attacking it is probably the most effective lever to change the world and move it to a safer place immediately and in the fastest possible way. Therefore, merging progress and sustainability. And I'll finish by saying this. Indonesians and Latin Americans and Africans and Arabs and South Asian do not want to move to Sweden. They really don't. Or Denmark. They want to stay at home. But to do that, their home has to be climate safe. Thank you.